Good afternoon, Year 10. So we're here today to understand the urban change that has happened in East London. So what I'm hoping to do is just give you a quick overview in this video using Google Earth so we can see some of the spatial distributions of these changes, and then it'll be over to you to work through the Google Slides and to make a timeline of the events and then the potential impacts that has had on the area and on the city particularly. Um, so we're going to use Google Earth to do this. So the first thing is to understand, we've got the area we're going to be mainly focusing on is this area, which I've drawn an orange polygon around, which is the former inner city industrial area, a former sort of Docklands area. And we're going to be thinking about the changes that have happened into this area. But I'm going to start by just turning off some of these layers. Now, we've already talked about the difference between structure and function. So we can see here the current structure and function, kind of structure of this area of Docklands. And actually, we can see the remnants of some of this sort of industrial past with these large flat warehouse buildings, and also we can see the kind of canals and the waterways and the quays, which basically increased the space for loading and unloading boats. But what we can also do is we can go using this function here. We can go back in time and we can see how this area has changed. So if we go back to 1940s, okay, so the picture becomes much more pixelated, but we can also see how there's even more of these low, flat industrial factories and warehouses. So we've got this area here, lots and lots of warehouses and docks, loading and unloading ships. Again, we can see all of this area up here, which is our and this is our industrial area. So here where the O2 is today, we can see a lot more space for loading and unloading ships, and this is the area we're particularly looking at now. This part of London during the 1930s, 40s was at its kind of busiest. So this was referred to as the port of empires. It was where raw materials would be brought in, and then manufactured goods would be redistributed all around the world by companies like the East India Trading Company, but were making huge profits. And even up eventually, however, this area went through decline, counter urbanization. Those industries moved to cheaper locations, such as China and India, where they could do those manufacturing much cheaper, and also improvements in kind of shipping and transport allowed the ships to become much bigger. So that led to the port leaving London and moving to Felixstowe. Now, this is out of the Thames. This meant the larger ships didn't have to struggle up the Thames. The ships could be much, much, much bigger. They could carry much, much more cargo. And if I just turn this layer off for a second, we can see this is where the UK's largest current port. And if we zoom in, we can see a container ship being loaded and unloaded. This is where the containers will be stacked up. And again, lots of sort of storage capacity. So this kind of grew up during that counter urbanization phase, and the jobs were relocated to Felixstowe, leaving a bit of a hole in the centre of London, where this area in orange was kind of left with a lot of unemployment and fell into decline, and the sort of those impacts we looked at last lesson, the spiral of deprivation, started to occur. So if we pick on a few key areas here, we can start turning some of these layers on. This is or was a Ford factory. So in its heyday, this is one of the biggest employers in the area. Lots and lots of car parts would be brought in on the boats, then be manufactured and redistributed or sold within the UK. So we still that building is still there today, as it's a bit further out of the city. The other areas to focus in on, if we turn, is London City Airport. So this area, which was once docks, has now been redeveloped into the airport, providing international transport links. Some of you have probably even flown from there, which really helps to regenerate and attract business to the area. Most of the flights there, lots of those flights there are kind of European short haul flights, which are perfectly suited to kind of business meetings. We've got the O2 Arena, I'm sure some of you have been to. It's called Millennium Dome. And in this area, which we're going to focus on a little bit more, Canary Wharf, where we can, in that fact, we can just go in. I'm sure some of you guys know Canary Wharf in a little bit more detail. Turn on 3D buildings. We can see that the kind of the urban structure there, these high-rise office blocks, HSBC, got JP Morgan, and we've got Barclays, lots of those big kind of finance centres, big legal firms that chose to put themselves in this area. But if we go back in time, hasn't always been there. Was just this area of docks and ports, and it wasn't really until 1991 where this area was redeveloped into kind of what we associate it with now. The other areas we're going to have a look focusing on today are is Stratford. So again, this was somewhere, if we just go back in time a little bit and turn off our former Docklands layer, was in the 90s sort of wasteland, so areas which are now Westfields and East Village was sort of rubbish dumps or just land that had been abandoned. So they're sort of where factories and warehouses had once been. The land was quite polluted, chemicals, so it wasn't really, it was quite a big, expensive site. So lots of businesses couldn't afford to redevelop that and chose to settle other places, which meant this area suffered from quite high levels of deprivation due to a lack of employment and a lack of facilities. We can see here the area Olympic Park is, again, full of these sort of warehouses, factories. We can see sort of lorry parks. So not particularly attractive or high functioning part of our city, even in 1999. And as we come forward in time, we can see quite how that's changed with the Olympics Park coming in. We can see the start to construction of the London Stadium here, the Olympic Stadium as it was known, right up until post-Olympics. You see there the aquatic centre, up to what we see today, which is with Westfields, big kind of almost $2 billion private investment into the UK's largest shopping mall. We've got East Village, which is the former athlete village, which has now been redeveloped into housing. And this is an example of housing called pepper potting. So we've got a mixture of rented housing, private housing, and private sales in this area. They've got gardens in the middle. We can see here a new school which was built. This is there today, an Arc Academy school, and yeah, this is, so you can see kind of just how much this has changed. Since that industrial time of all this park being re-landscaped, improving the environmental quality in that area. So we want to think about kind of how a bit and why these changes happened. This another kind of key idea we need to think about here is this purple line, which represents the DLR. So we've got not just London City improving the transport links, we've also got this Docklands light railway, which connected this area here, which we consider as the Isle of Dogs, to the rest of London. So your task today is to go through the slides and create a timeline, as we said, to think about the changes that have happened in these areas, particularly focusing on Canary Wharf and Stratford, that have reduced deprivation in East London. I look forward to seeing what you come up with.